I'm back. We're on part 2 of Unit 2, Section 1. That's a lot of numbers. So we're in the photosynthesis unit, which is Unit 2 of your course in biology right now. And we are still in Section 1, but I wanted to do a part 2. I didn't want to make it too lengthy. But let's start pulling everything together a little bit more, as we will do that when we come back for Section 2. So, Part 1, we talked about a lot of the details, the exergonic, the endergonic reactions, the laws of thermodynamics, and we ended with oxidation and reduction. Now, let's talk a little bit more about how we utilize all those and the energy involved, okay? So, starting off, we're going to talk about the good old, actually, let me go back here just a little bit and pull this up. I like to call it the bolisms, okay? The bolisms. So the bolisms, and let me come back here, is really my only name that I made up for it, so it's actually not a real term. But the bolisms are referring to the anabolism and catabolism, or catabolism, however you want to pronounce it. Anabolism is the series of chemical reactions that build organic molecules. These reactions usually take energy. So in anabolism, which I'm going to show you a picture in just a second, you're taking kind of smaller molecules and making them larger, okay? Taking energy to do that. Catabolism, or catabolism, is the opposite. It's basically a series of chemical reactions that break down larger molecules into smaller molecules. And they're usually releasing energy with that, okay? Let's see some diagrams to kind of show that. And let's make that a little bit smaller so you can see. So as you know, this is right here, let's talk about anabolism. So we're taking basically smaller molecules, adding energy to this reaction in order to create larger, and in this case, food molecules, okay? Which is stored potential energy because you haven't eaten it yet, right? It's not kinetic energy until you actually eat it and it starts to do something. So basically, a large food molecule would be stored potential energy, and you're taking smaller molecules, adding energy to it. That's anabolism. Catabolism, basically the opposite. So you're taking this large food molecule, hello, I can't talk, which is the stored or potential energy, and you're breaking it down. So maybe like in our mouth is the first place where digestion happens. We're actually breaking down carbohydrates with the use of our saliva. And what is happening is you're having this larger food molecule that's being broken down, okay, and into smaller molecules, and energy is released in the form of sugar, which we're going to talk about what that sugar actually ends up doing later on in our bodies, okay? So, free energy released. Here is another diagram. Again, anabolism, taking smaller molecules, adding energy into it to get a larger molecule, where the opposite with catabolism, where you're taking a large molecule, basically energy is released as you break it down into smaller molecules, okay? Okay. Moving on. So back to energy, because then again, all of this stuff has to do with energy. But I want to bring up two terms, autotrophs and heterotrophs. And you guys might have heard those terms before, and we'll talk about them in depth, and actually we'll go into them even more when we talk about some of the stuff next semester in biology. But autotrophs, like plants, make their own food, okay? So when we think about the anabolism and the catabolism, you're thinking about anabolism a lot with plants because they're actually producing their own food. They're taking small molecules, adding energy to it to make a larger molecule. Heterotrophs, on the other hand, like us, we can't make our own food. We have to get our food source from something else, place it into our mouth, chew it up, and that is our energy. Okay? Again, with humans and a lot of mammals and other organisms, we are utilizing the catabolism a lot more because we're taking a large food item, putting it into our mouth, and breaking it down into smaller molecules. Okay? Here's a little picture, help you out a little bit. So, oops, let's go back to that, sorry. Plants, algae, many bacteria, those are lots of autotrophs, okay? And then your heterotrophs would be animals, fungi, many bacteria. And this just kind of shows the system of how this works. Like basically you're producing your food for an autotroph, releasing organic compounds as well as oxygen, in which a lot of the heterotrophs are using, and then we again are producing water and carbon dioxide that can allow for the plants, or the autotrophs, to produce their own food again. So it's this lovely circular cycle that we help each other out, right? Help a brother out. All right, now on to enzymes. Again, these are some topics, the things that I'm going to talk about in this mini session, enzymes in particular, and then the next thing we're going to go into, I could really talk endlessly about. But this is just high school biology. When you get into AP biology and your college biology, you'll pick these things apart to a much greater detail. But enzymes are fascinating, and your labs are going to have to do with your enzymes. Enzymes, basically, without enzymes, we wouldn't be able to survive. So you need to understand the importance of enzymes. What enzymes do is they basically, it's not that they kind of bring two molecules together or two things together to form a reaction. So, and that's not the best way to explain it, but ultimately if enzymes didn't occur, we didn't have enzymes within our bodies, reactions would not only take place much slower, but they wouldn't maybe even take place at all. So it's a big deal when we talk about enzymes. And I say AKA catalysts. A lot of times we intertwine enzymes and the word catalyst. A catalyst, when you think about a catalyst, it's going to make something go much faster, okay? When you have a catalyst for something, maybe in the world of business, you have a catalyst that actually gets that business going and rolling, okay? Well, an enzyme gets something going in your body and in other organisms' bodies as to, making this reaction happen, okay? So that's what an enzyme does. It speeds it up and it allows for something to happen, and typically those things are vital, okay? And, this graph is kind of a little cheesy graph, but it shows a little bit that basically in this purple you have uncatalyzed reaction and then catalyzed reaction. If you notice on the x-axis you have, y-axis, you have energy, and then on the x-axis progress of reaction. So it takes a lot more energy if you don't have a catalyst. Okay, well maybe you don't have that extra energy. So it's very important to have those enzymes acting as catalysts to speed up and progress a reaction. Okay, so hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. And then this lovely diagram is just what an enzyme molecule looks like. It's very crazy. I can't even begin to really explain what each of these things mean because we make 2,000 enzymes in our bodies. Okay, we have tons of different enzymes. Okay, so, oops, sorry, because of my screen I'm not able to show you guys everything I want. So many of these enzymes make it possible for us to live. There's lots of examples of if we're missing enzymes, like say there are people that have cystic fibrosis is one example that comes to my mind quickly. That is a genetic disorder, and basically one of the things, there's many things that happen with people that have cystic fibrosis, but one of the things is they're missing the enzymes in order to digest certain foods. So I had a friend who was a nanny, and she took care of a little teeny girl, little teeny baby, who had cystic fibrosis, and every time she ate, she had to be fed actual enzymes in order to break that food down so that her body could utilize those nutrients. So see how important enzymes are, and that if there's something wrong in your body where you're not producing them, something major can happen. Cystic fibrosis is a really devastating disease because typically those kids don't live past 5 to 10 years of age. It's a rare occasion if they do. So enzymes are incredibly important. Okay, and they're affected by many things. So you need to understand, and this has a lot to do with your lab, one of the labs that you can pick from is figuring out how an enzyme works best or what affects the enzymes and how they work. So a lot of things such as temperature. If you heat something up, sometimes the enzyme will work better, but if you heat up it too much, you denature that enzyme and it basically unwinds and becomes unusable. Okay, so it's got to be this kind of perfect environment. The pH affects it as well. If you throw the pH off too much, your enzyme may become denatured as well, and it's not going to be usable. Okay, many other things. How much of the enzyme exists can affect how it's working effectively. So there's a lot of different things. Please read about that more in your lesson, because it talks about that in a good paragraph, and it words it pretty well so you can understand it. All right, so the last thing I wanted to show you is basically, again, let's kind of make this a little bit smaller, the catalyst. Okay, remember enzymes kind of act as catalysts to speed things up. So basically these catalysts bind to a reactant, and then the release of the products moving on from another reactant. So basically this reaction can occur, and the catalyst can basically remove themselves and go on to another reactant. So they don't just kind of die off after they have they help a reaction occur. They go on to keep making those things happen, kind of like this chain reaction. So very important. Okay. So head spinning yet? Hopefully not too bad like this crazy dude. All right, so let's move on to our last and final thing. Very, very important. Something called ATP. Again, we're going to just briefly touch on this. You could learn endless hours of information on ATP, and it's quite interesting. And we're not done talking about it in this mini lesson, but we are going to briefly talk about it. So if you feel like you're being left hanging, you are. No, just kidding. But I do want to just kind of touch on it, and then in section 2 we're going to go into it a little bit more when we talk about the pathways and how ATP is utilized more specifically. So this is a very, very important molecule. If you guys have heard of ATP before, you'll know that it's our main energy source. And a lot of times you're like, what? I've never even heard of that molecule, and it provides us with energy. Well, believe it or not, when we eat food, you eat this big old fatty hamburger and like, dom, dom, dom. Your body does amazing things, and we'll talk about that next semester, but how it breaks it up into nutrients and ultimately into some very, very small molecules, one being glucose. And glucose is very, simple sugar, but then you take that simple sugar and you can actually convert it into ATP, which is kind of the universal energy source for all living organisms. Okay, so kind of cool. All right, here is the actual molecule itself. I'm not going to go into this too heavily, but you have a ribose sugar, okay, right here that makes up part of the adenosine triphosphate molecule. You have an adenine base, okay, that that goes into more when we talk about DNA. There's nucleotides. There's many different bases, nucleotide bases. One of them is adenine. So in this case, the adenosine triphosphate is made up with the adenine base, a ribose sugar, and 3 phosphates. Okay, we call it triphosphate because there are 3. And this area right here is where all of the energy is stored. Actually, in this one area, these bonds right here, these covalent bonds. And when this is broken, much energy is given off. So much energy you can't even imagine. Now, obviously, relatively speaking, because these molecules are very small, so we have lots of ATP, but when you release it, it's a huge amount of energy for that small of a molecule. I should get a comparison or like an analogy as to how much energy that is. You guys would be amazed. So that's what the molecule looks like. But let's talk about a little bit more about it. I really wanted to show you this video, this YouTube video. So please, underneath the link in the mini lesson where you click to get to this video, there's another link to a YouTube video. It did not allow me to embed it, which is fine. For one reason or another, this person does not want it embedded into other things, but it's a great resource to kind of help you understand what exactly ATP is. So please click on that link and watch that short video. It's only, I think, 2 or 3 minutes long, but it's a good resource to kind of help you understand what ATP is, okay? So the nature of it, again, is a high energy molecule, okay? When that phosphate is broken that I showed you, it becomes ADP, adenosine diphosphate. So as opposed to tri, meaning 3 phosphates, now you have let go of one of those phosphate groups and it becomes adenosine diphosphate, which is a lower energy molecule, okay? But the nature of it is to store massive amounts of energy and release it when your body needs it. How nice, right? Okay, so here's kind of a picture. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller so everyone can see it in my little window here. But you have ATP. Again, you have your adenine, which makes up your adenosine, your ribose, and your phosphate groups. Your 3 phosphate groups. High energy phosphate bonds right here, okay? Now, when you want to take some of that energy away, you break off that bond, okay? So you get energy out of it, but you end up with a lower energy molecule, adenosine diphosphate. Okay, so you only have 2 phosphate groups. Now, the opposite can happen too, though, because this molecule just doesn't go away after it's lost its high energy. It doesn't just say, I'm done, send me to the grave. No, actually it can be built back up into ATP, okay? So basically through some cycles that we're going to talk about next week, you can see how these phosphates are then added again to the ADP to make ATP. So basically this cycle goes back and forth where you have ATP broken down to release energy into ADP. ADP can also gain another phosphate to then become ATP once again. Okay? That's the easy version, but I'll leave it at that. So hopefully you guys understand that. Okay, so transfer of energy to it. Again, I kind of went over that. Basically, you can transfer energy to it from ADP to ATP, and you can also get energy from it by just breaking it down from ATP and breaking off one of those phosphates. But I'm going to show you another video because we're going to talk about both of these in this short video. So watch this and hopefully it helps a little bit. Okay, so basically I liked how that video kind of brings in the exergonic and the endergonic back into it because we didn't just discuss those things in part 1 for no reason. There's a lot of purpose behind each of those. So all these details I want you guys to know will actually come together and make a lot more sense after we're done with section 2. So that will be hopefully finishing up a lot of, well actually I think there's 3 sections in this unit, but it'll help a lot. So that is it on ATP. There is one entire page devoted to ATP in the section 1. I think it's the last page, no, second to last page of that section. But go back to that, kind of read through that again. I hope that you guys are watching these lessons in conjunction with reading and taking notes because that's the best way to get the full effect out of all of this stuff. So that's all for. No, not with the unit, so I don't want you guys to think we're not done with the unit. Okay, so just disregard that. But that's all for this section. So come back for section 2. We'll actually be discussing more of the stuff in here. Okay, because remember I have to put the entire unit into this teeny tiny circle. So that's it for now, but meet me back here for the mini lessons coming up in section 2. Have a wonderful week.